Welcome to the No Fear podcast and the No Fear live broadcast. I'm your host, Coach Blauer. If you're into mindset training, performance psychology, personal development, you'll dig this new format. No Fear Live is a unique broadcast, and it's different from the No Fear podcast. We decided to go live because we wanted to create the opportunity to interact with people like you all over the world, where anyone can log in and ask questions, and in some cases, you may even get invited into the show. The great thing about the live broadcast is that it's much more personal for the listener. That's you. Remember, self-defense isn't always about a confrontation with someone else. The first and most important fight is winning the one inside your head. Da-da-da! Dude.
Hey, Tony.
Barry Eisler, welcome to the No Fear Live podcast.
It is great to be here.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. It's been too long since we've gotten to see each other, although we chat every now and then.
I was going to say it's been too long since we had epic sushi together, both in your hometown. I remember that massive place you took me to.
It was memorable.
And then, of course, we hit Nobu whenever we can. So people hate us already, just listening to this going, all these guys eat is sushi.
People who don't live on the coast.
Right, right. I recently had sushi. I was working a gig, Operation Black Site. Tim Kennedy was one of the instructors, Michael Chandler, it was all this, and it was in Temecula, and they had a team meeting at a sushi restaurant. And I'm like going, sushi in Temecula? Like, are you kidding me? And it was pretty freaking good.
Temecula is what, just north of San Diego, right? Where the highway bifurcates.
Yeah, but it's inland, and it's not a place that you're thinking
you wouldn't associate with the boat coming right up to the restaurant.
There's something that some of the best sushi, this might have been psychological, was I had with Brandon Lee in Hong Kong in 1988 on the set of Legacy of Rage.
Mm-hmm.
And we had that. I was going like, this is the freshest sushi I will ever have, right? I mean, it was one of these high-end places, but they had, and I'm sure you've been in one, they had the moats with the fish swimming around in them.
Yeah.
And I was like, like creepy stuff, like, taking a bite of sushi going, sorry, I think this might have been your cousin. It was like, you might have had too much sake. Dude, I got a bunch of questions for you. And, we'll end up just chit-chatting a little bit. But I wanted to tell all the audience and the listeners, and this is live, and we never know if there's going to be 1 people or 20 people on. And so there may be some questions. But if you are listening to this live, I see some people doing stuff. And I was wondering during the day, should we do these live? We did one recently with Tim Larkin on a Sunday that had a good turnout. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going, I guess, like, real people are working during the week. What are you doing during the week for, or whatever? But if you are able to log in and tell us, say hi and where you're from, do that in the comments. Barry, what were you about to say?
I was going to say, I wonder the same thing all the time. I was at the gym right before we got on here, and it's packed. So I know why I can go there. I have a pretty flexible schedule,
right?
I feel fortunate to be in that line of work, but that kind of work. But I don't know everyone else. I'm like, what are you doing here at 11 o'clock?
Right, you're packed. It's like
great that you can do it.
Yeah, I think the world, and I want to come back to our connection, origin, and your history, because our audience, typically law enforcement, military, CrossFitter, martial artist, firefighter, that's the people that are attracted to our stuff. But it's diversifying, and I'm trying to get unique guests on here. And there's so much about your background that fits in right with my demographic. But what I wanted to do is like a quick sidebar, inspired by what your observation was at the gym. I think in the last 3 years, a lot of people realized that they could work from home. Yeah. That they could maybe, and even people who used to work at a big company, like I think that the craziness of the last 3 years made people realize like there was no need to come to the office. All my work could be done if I got my brain on my computer and the internet. So
yeah, there's, and I think there's an interesting underlying phenomenon there, which is that 80% of humans will fear change no matter what the change is. So before the pandemic, the notion that you could work remotely, that you didn't need to come into work 5 days a week, that you could be far away, it would represent change from the status quo. And so 80% of people would just instinctively resist that. I'm not putting anyone down. It's just how the species is wired. Right. I remember my best example of this is, if anybody remembers when Twitter went from 140 characters to 280, remember that? There was an outcry on Twitter. Oh, you're going to wreck Twitter. It's never going to work. And I can't conduct this experiment, but I'm confident that if you could flip it in another universe, so that Twitter started with 280 characters and then the brass at Twitter decided, you know what, 140 would be better, the very same people would be making the very same arguments for the change that was a reverse. So it's not the specific change that matters, it's just change. So it took the pandemic for those 80% of people to realize what was probably not so difficult to understand even before the pandemic, which is there are a lot of jobs that can be done remotely. You don't need all this office space. You don't need people commuting. You don't need to have them in the office to get their jobs done. So, if you want to call that a silver lining, maybe.
I don't know. Well, they were all at your gym today using the equipment.
Hopefully none of them had COVID.
Right. And hopefully they wiped down the equipment after. Hey, let's go back, way over a decade ago. I'm reading your first John Rain book.
Yeah.
And I'm like reading parts, and you're describing the violence and the timing and what you're seeing. And I say to myself, this guy actually trains. He's not writing something. This guy actually, and there's one line that I just loved. And there was one line, something to the effect, I'm going to fuck this up, but correct me because you wrote it. But when the first John Rain was 2003?
Came out in 2002.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's see how good your memory is. It was a line like something like, I don't like violence, but when it happens, I like it to be fast, or something to that. Somebody was getting in his face and woofing and getting himself pumped up. And Rain looks for ways to avoid violence, but if he sees there's going to be violence, he prefers his violence to be sudden. Right. And so the sudden violence, and anyone who follows me knows that, this is language that I loved. And I flipped to the back of the book, and lo and behold, your website was there, maybe your email in the original sleeve. I don't know, contact, but I went on there, I found that. And so I write this guy, and I write something, and we were trying to find it for the show because I wanted to show, but we couldn't find it. It was like old server. And I write this guy going, Dear Barry, I just wanted to say, like, as a guy who teaches, hand to hand, like, I was really impressed. Most people don't know how to describe violence because they're imagining and making it up, and kudos, man. And the answer I got back was, hey, Tony, big fan of yours. I actually get your newsletter. And I was like, holy fuck, this guy, because at that point, like I had you on this pedestal because you're a fucking printed author.
Well, that's okay.
Right. No, I get that. So I was like blown away that you answered me back, that you even knew who I was.
Yeah, I remember this distinctly. I remember I was in the kitchen talking to my wife, Laura, and what you said in your email was, Barry, I don't know if you've heard of me. Okay. And I was saying to Laura, holy shit, Tony Blauer is reading my books.
That's so funny.
So yeah, I certainly had heard from you, and that's a nice compliment about the fact that hopefully I get violence and a lot of other things right in my books. I really try. I mean, I haven't had a lot of experience with violence in my life. No combat, just what you'd call like schoolyard fights, couple of street fights a while ago. But I think if I have a talent for this stuff that goes into my writing, I think I'm good at asking the right questions. I think that's an important thing to have and to try to develop it. So you know a lot more about violence and training, the genetic response to an ambush, all these sorts of things. I mean, you're an innovator in all these areas. This is not my field, but I'm pretty good at, when I come across people, I'm like, this makes sense. This passes my bullshit test. And I listen, and then I'll develop a body of questions, and I got a whole methodology for that, starting with, say, internet knowledge or whatever. I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but internet knowledge gets a bad rap because people become internet experts and they start opining about things and they don't have real expertise. And internet knowledge is bad for actual expertise. That's true. But the internet's a tool. Like any tool, it can be used well or it can be used disastrously. What internet knowledge is good for is for forming a basis of understanding that can get you to the next level, which can be through further reading, experience, interviews of actual experts, etc. And I'm pretty good at that stuff. And I feel lucky to know a lot of people like you who I can go to with questions, hopefully intelligent, informed questions about your areas of expertise. And then I can use the knowledge I gain that way in my books and make it seem like I'm actually more of an expert than I really am.
Right. I think so much what you described there helps me explain to people who aren't in a violent profession like law enforcement, military, public safety, how can we teach in our Be Your Own Bodyguard course people who abhor violence and really, don't want to experience it?
Right.
How do we, and it's the same thing. We're teaching them how to use instincts, intuition, and intelligence.
Right.
How do you, you talked about asking questions in every single class. I talk about the Socratic pause that, okay, I just shared something with you. I just gave you a scenario. What's going on? Where's your head? What are you thinking? This is the Socratic pause where you get to say, yeah, I don't think I could pull that off. And that becomes a talk about the psychology of fear, the penalty of inaction.
Right.
Yeah, but would this really hurt somebody here? That might be a talk about a nerve cluster or pain or target acquisition. I was out of breath from that drill. Okay, now we're talking about tactical fitness. So we always insert the tactical pause. You do that organically as a researcher, as an author, and you might be part unicorn, like part of your what led you here. Like I like to think that because fear has plagued me my whole life, so it doesn't surprise me that I created a program called No Fear, and that it's helped thousands of people around the world. But people are often shocked when they hear that I'm afraid of a lot of things, and I go like, you are too, which is why we're talking, not you, but anybody. And I know guys who have been in gunfights. And they're not afraid of the gunfight, but they're maybe afraid of getting close to their wife or asserting themselves or talking in public. I tell this story a lot where I've had 12 full-time SWAT guys in a custom course, and I go, guys, any questions about this last block? Okay, no, let's take a 10-minute break. I'm getting coffee. Guy walks, hey, Coach Blauer, I got a question for you. I just fucking said, does anyone have a question? Everyone said no. Yeah, I didn't want to say it. Like, he'll get in a gunfight, he'll risk his life, but you want to ask this question in front of his buddies. So in the same way you said in the beginning, people fear change. Public speaking, number one fear for many people. Let's go back to you for a second. And you're talking about, you made me think of another time. So what Barry was talking about, how I interpreted that is he was being extremely humble about his skill set, because you've been a martial artist for how many years now? 30, 40, 50?
I started wrestling in high school when I was 14. And I'll say this, I feel I'm happy about this. I'll give myself a little pat on the back. I think I was ahead of my time in recognizing wrestling as a martial art, not just as a sport. It's a really good martial art.
Are you saying you invented the UFC? Is that what you just said?
I invented the internet, not the UFC. But like you, I had a lot of fears. I got bullied a lot when I was a kid. I was a really bad athlete. And I think we live in gentler times, but when I grew up, when I was in like first grade, second grade, the thing was in gym class, the teacher would take the two best athletes in the class and they would be captains of the teams. And then they could select one by one who they wanted to be on their team, whatever it was for, dodgeball or baseball or whatever the game was that day. And I was always the second to last kid to get picked. And because athletic prowess at that age is currency, I was a dork. I don't want to overstate it, but I was not one of the cool kids, and I got picked on. Maybe there was more bullying then. I don't really know as much what it's like now, because this is a half century later. It's mind boggling. But anyway, and that made a big, I hated being bullied, and I feel like I learned the right lesson from being bullied. Many people, the lesson they learn from being bullied is that it sucks to be bullied, and that's why you got to be a bully. And that, in my mind, is the wrong lesson. What the lesson you should learn is bullying sucks, and you should try to develop the skills so that you don't have to put up with it personally, but so that you can also help other people who might be getting bullied, not so that you can become the thing you used to abhor just because it was being done to you. But that's what got me. So I started lifting weights at some point, and then I remember looking at wrestlers and thinking, I wouldn't want to fuck with one of those guys. And that's what was available to me. Like in another neighborhood, maybe it would have been boxing or something like that. But I grew up in New Jersey, and a lot of people don't know this, but New Jersey is a big high school wrestling state, or at least when I was a kid. Oklahoma, Iowa, got some big states, and New Jersey is one of them. So I got fanatically into wrestling, got pretty respectable on a short trajectory. I started my sophomore year in high school. Anyway, my initial interest in wrestling, it just became a love. I love grappling. That's my first love as any kind of martial art it's going to be grappling. No, it doesn't mean grappling is better or anything. It's just idiosyncratic. But initially it was I want to be one of those guys who I look at and I'm like, I wouldn't want to fuck with him. And then it just became an overall love for everything about the sport and the practice. So that's how I got started. High school wrestling, which was, I don't know when that was, like 1980 or something like that. And then without going into the whole history, I'll make it quick. Then I was an undergraduate at Cornell, and there were some guys I met in the gym from Japan. They were in the business school. And I don't remember how I got to chatting with them, but they were judoka, and they were tough. They were fourth dan from the Kodokans. These guys were no shit.
Kodokan's the Mecca.
Thank you. Yeah, Kodokan is the birthplace of modern judo. It's where, it's not the original building anymore, but it's where Jigoro Kano started judo. And so it's fair to say it's like the Mecca of modern judo. It's where you just want to at least make a visit if you're into judo at some point. And I got to train there hardcore 6 days a week for a year in 1993 to 94. But before I went to Tokyo to do this, I met these guys. They were interested in American style wrestling, and I was interested just like in grappling. I'm like, well, what do you guys do? And I realized from rolling around with them and then joining the Cornell Judo Club that I had some habits that were good in a sport wrestling contest, but that would get me hurt, or at least submitted in a judo match. And so it was interesting to have to adjust my tactics and to learn this other approach to grappling. And from there, I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And when I was in college, I told you I wasn't going to do the whole story, but it's almost done. I started playing around with karate. And what I learned from that experience, I'm really not putting down any martial art, but I think it's fair this is my opinion. The way you train is much more important than what you're training. So I don't really care what the art is, but if you're just doing like point sparring with it versus you're really punching each other, or if you're just doing wrestling or grappling drills, but you're not really doing a force on force thing with an opponent who's trying his hardest to do all those same things to you, I would not have a lot of confidence in what you're doing in its applicability in a high adrenal stress situation, like a street fight, like combat, like that kind of thing. Look, maybe I'm wrong. That's just my experience. And what I noticed with the karate, it was interesting, but it was point sparring. It wasn't what I was used to in a wrestling contest, which is, sure, there are rules, but within those rules, that guy is trying his hardest to do everything to you that you're trying
collision.
to do.
There's grit, there's collision, there's anaerobic, there's
a
fear.
Whole different feeling. So then I was like, well, I don't know anything about punching. And as I said, I was a bad athlete, not coordinated. I mean, really, baseball, that kind of anything you have to hit a ball with a stick or a racket, something that's flying at you. It just doesn't come naturally to me. Interesting. Stop it. I have PTSD. But interestingly, from all the martial arts, I did get more coordinated over the years. Anyway, then I was like, I got to learn something about punching and not getting punched. And I don't feel like the way this karate class is being taught, I'm learning that. Again, not putting down the art generally, but the way this class was being taught wasn't for me. But in downtown Ithaca, there was a boxing gym. It had nothing to do with Cornell. It was a gritty place, and great coach. I started going down there twice a week in boxing, and it was scary to me. To your point, like I don't want to overstate this. There are fears that are sensible, and I wouldn't recommend that you face them. Like, I'm scared to friggin' rub a cheese grater on my face. I'm like, that's good. I get over that fear. But the fear of somebody trying to punch me, of getting hit, all that kind of stuff, had a lot to do with my childhood. So I was like, I got to face this. And boxing was fantastic for that.
Mm-hmm.
You can start to learn that nobody likes to get punched, but it's not the end of the world. And you just get used to it and learn to recover. Same thing with being strangled in jiu-jitsu or judo. Like a person who's never been strangled before, you strangle that person, cut off the oxygen, you'll get a panic reaction, almost certainly. It's an instinctive panic reaction. But it is weird and interesting that after someone has tried to strangle you with all their might for the 100th or 1000th time, it's just you become very analytical about it. You're like, can't breathe. Which way is the choke? Rotate. Oh, wrong way. Rotate the other way. Try to get my hand in there, whatever. Same thing about getting punched, which, by the way, to me is what makes boxing such an effective martial art. Not saying it's the only or the best or anything, but it is an effective martial art. Part of it is if you punch a boxer, you just did to him something that happens to him like 100 times a night in sparring.
You might
It's
have
not
woken
a
up.
shocking event for this guy. You know?
It's interesting.
So anyway, that's it. To wrap this up really quickly, what I learned from all this is if you want to train in a way that's going to be applicable in a self-defense environment, I really think you got to incorporate force on force and adrenal stress. And that's what gets programmed into your muscles and will be useful in the live event. That's been my experience. Not everyone will agree, and that's beautiful. I'm not trying to persuade anyone, just offering my opinion.
When are you going to run for president? Because you're like so political and non-divisive and all-inclusive, all martial arts. I'm not saying this is good. And also, I'm not going to tell you my whole life story. I'm going to keep this short, but I'm going to go through every single fucking martial. Dude.
No, I left out a few. I left out
Aikido. All of that I was building up because you were very self-deprecating about I was talking about how I could read when I was reading your stuff, and this is obviously you're a talented writer, and I could read, and this is just your first book. You've got 23 books, I think, right?
Got 18 novels and 4 short stories.
Right. So that's insane. That's a lot of writing. So, but this was your first book, the first John Wayne book. This was to me polished and edgy, and you captured the psychology, the mindset that precedes the action. Most people go right to the action.
Yeah.
And for anyone who follows me and is listening to this, you know that I always talk about the mind navigates the body, that you need to clear your fear before you can access your complex motor skills and blah, 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 blah. And I could intuit that sensibility in your writing, which is why I wrote to you. You said something interesting, and I want to use it to kind of like leapfrog to this example of you said you ask questions and you would think you kind of like that Simon Sinek or you know, what's the why here, you know? And I remember once in one of the novels, I was on the road doing a SWAT class somewhere. And you asked me, you said, hey, you were talking and you said you were that John Rain is going to have a fight in some yard somewhere, close quarter. And you asked me about, would this gun move make sense? And I remember I was with one of my guys who was helping me. He's like a SWAT cop at his department. He was assisting me, and we filmed. Then it wasn't like good. It was like shitty phones back then. We filmed the thing about how that might look and some of the stuff. And I share that. I'm sure you remember that. But I share that because it's an example of your professionalism and your curiosity. And then that's what would, so when you're writing about the fights in the books, and those of you who like good action novels, if you haven't already started reading the John Rain series and his other books, jump in there and we'll, I'm just going to do this right now. Look, check this out.
Wow.
Not all of them, but pretty fancy, right?
Damn.
Yeah. We don't fuck around here on No Fair Live. Yeah, who is this guy that wrote this? Was that Chat GPT wrote all that, right?
Probably that's where we're going.
The Chat GPT, right? My next novel. Thanks. Like the idea that you would, and over the years, you've worked with Tim and Wim and all sorts of other experts, and all of that inspires you to create, violent encounters in your books, correct? I mean, that's part of your research.
Yeah. And one of the things I love a lot of aspects about what I've been doing for a living the last 20 years, telling stories, is I have a curious mind, and it is a joy for me to interview anyone with expertise in almost any area. I mean, if you find someone who's passionate about an area and has developed a lifetime of knowledge about that area, and you get to just ask that person questions about the inner workings of that area, for me, it's electrifying. It's a joy. It's a privilege. I love it. So it's not just people with experience in martial arts, self-defense, and violence who I get to interview, or former criminals, cops, doctors, gamblers, professional gamblers, because that was one of the books had a gambling plot element, and it's so much fun. So, like I was saying before, I first try to develop that body of internet knowledge so I know what questions I want to get into. Right. And then you get to the point where you can ask someone who really knows, and people love, this isn't like stop the presses for this great pearl of wisdom, but people love to talk about things they have expertise in. And that makes the conversation so much fun. And I'll tell you one other little element of this that was, maybe it shouldn't have been surprising, but it was. Doctors, when you ask them how you would kill someone and make it look natural, they love to talk about that. First, they're a little reluctant. They're like, why do you want to know? This is weird. But once you wind them up, oh my God, it's all they want to talk about. And cops, homicide detectives, love to talk about how you would get away with murder. It's weird. It's like the dark side or the flip side or whatever of protector professions. There's a little part of the brain, like the darker angels of our nature, that are like, oh, if you let me in a hypothetical just for fun, fictional context, I'll go on and on about it. What I would say,
hold on a sec. I got to interrupt. Look what I popped up on the screen there. That's just from Indiana.
Oh, that's so nice. Oh, yeah, Statistical coaching. I'm sorry. This is someone I know, I think on Twitter. Thank you for watching.
Yeah, cool, eh? Nice. Okay, go ahead. Where were you? Do you remember?
Yeah, separating out. Lately I've been thinking, as I try to unearth principles in systems, you want to collect different data sets and then try to distill out what are principles as distinct from artifacts. And what I would say is, for anyone who's interested in writing, I do an unusual amount of research, on-site research, interviews with experts, kind of research, a ton of background reading. That's just my method. I wouldn't say you need to do that to write fiction, because after all, the stories themselves are made up. This works for me. I wouldn't call it a principle. I'd call it an artifact. Doesn't work for everyone. But this is something that I think is a principle, and it comes out in the course of my research. Tony, you mentioned it a second ago, which is a common mistake, I think, especially with beginner writers, is they default to the mechanics. And if you're any kind of martial artist, and this is the more expertise you have, say, in martial arts, the more this might be a danger for you. You really know the mechanics. And so naturally, when you're writing a story, you're like, oh, I'm going to talk about every little aspect of the Kimura lock, or, whatever. And what makes fiction work is it brings out emotions in readers. And what brings out emotions, if you're depicting violence, is the feeling of violence. The mechanics are part of that, but they're not the thing itself. This, by the way, is a problem that a lot of writers have with what I like to euphemistically call love scenes. Because they do the tab A, slot B stuff, which is necessary, but not sufficient. You got to, on some level, show what's going on. But there's no feeling between the characters. It's not turning the plot. It's not changing the relationship. They're not nervous. What does this mean? Is it going to happen? There's ambiguity. There's ambivalence. They don't do that stuff. And so then the scene becomes, it becomes silly. And the same danger exists in the other kind of action scene, which is violent action scenes. And in fiction writing generally, there's a cliche. If anybody here is interested in writing, it's a cliche, but it's a good cliche, which is, don't describe the rain, describe the way the rain feels. That's what makes people respond to fiction. You feel like you're there. You feel like you're this character facing what this character is facing.
Is this intuition and experience, or did somebody teach this?
So that's a really interesting question. And this applies to all things, including like learning martial arts or being more effective in the face of violence or ambushes or any element of violence in writing or in any skill. I think it's iterative. Lately, I've been noticing that in the acquisition of any new skill, there are three, it's a continuum. You can't break it down this cleanly, but to oversimplify, there are three levels of skill acquisition, I think. There's theory, there's drills, and there's live training. And then maybe there's the event itself. And as Bruce Lee said, that the best preparation for the event is the event. You want to get as close to the real thing as possible in your training. And if you think about this in terms of like theory, drills, and live practice, it becomes iterative. So you're doing background drills if you want to be a writer just by reading a lot. It's osmosis. You read enough novels and something goes into your brain. And then now you're trying to write a novel yourself. That's more like live training. But then you're like, well, I don't really know. And so I pick up a book on a how-to book or watch a video or something. And then you get some of the theory. And then, oh, you know what? I didn't know that that what you really want to do if you're creating strong characters is you want to show like the character thinks that she wants something, but there's something underneath that she's not aware of that she really needs. And that if you're aware of those two elements, what the character thinks she wants and what she really needs, that's part of creating great characters. And then you start looking, here's the drills. What are some of the books I love or movies I like, and rewatch them or even just think about them if you know them well enough. And you start to know, oh, right, this is what in Casablanca, Humphrey Bogart, what he thinks he needs is to be a cynic and to keep the world at bay. What he really needs is to reconnect with his idealism through his lost love with Ilsa. Right. And that's what drives the plot of that story. That's the drills. And then you go back to writing your own story using your deeper, more conscious knowledge of theory, which you've practiced through drills. And now you're using it in your live training. That's writing. You could do the same thing, obviously, with martial arts.
Do you coach authors, new authors?
Not like as a living, but whatever. But I have friends and relatives of friends who are interested in writing, and occasionally, will.
It might be you know, I don't know if you know the expression. Of course, you know the expression. You're from music. Qui docet dicet. Those who teach learn. Latin for those. It's one of my favorite, you know. So what you described there, so like for 5 minutes while you were talking about, theory, drills, live training, application, osmosis, all of that you were using, and this is for the audience right now, everyone listening. What Barry, for some of you might have turned off a little bit when that's interesting, but he's talking about like writing and how many people going, you know what, I'm an accountant now, but now I'm going to write a book. You're probably not thinking about writing a book, but metaphorically, your story is your novel. Your life is your book, the history of you. The idea of having a theory and then having an experience and thinking about it and recognizing that every iteration of that experience, if you're actually weighing and considering the experience, helps you self-evolve and self-actualize. And I make this lovingly metaphor that, life is the teacher and life is the lesson, but you're also the teacher because you grade yourself. Oh, I showed up, I gave myself an A, but I fucking failed. I got an F, but I got up, dusted myself off, tried again. So I give myself an A for effort. That time I did a D, I had a bad attitude during it. And then if you do this enough, eventually you've developed your from experience and resilience and fear management and all of that. It's iterative. And now suddenly, you're the hero in your story as the metaphor goes. So I just wanted to, like, those of you for a moment when Barry's exclusively talking about the process of writing a book, I was going, this is fucking cool, because you could literally substitute book for your current relationship, your current job, your life, your kids. It was pretty deep there.
Thanks for saying so. And for anyone who's interested in martial arts, more than you're interested in writing, which is a safe bet with this podcast. Again, everything I was just talking about, if you've trained in martial arts, you know it's the same. So what's the theory? Books. I mean, when I was hardcore into judo, I had a lot of books by experts on, some of them were quite specific. I mean, just certain books on certain kinds of arm bars, books on certain kinds of strangles, because you can go super deep on individual topics. That's pure theory. You're just reading a book. You're not going to be able to do those things just from reading the book. But then you get your training partner and you're like, let me try this. Let me try this. Okay, give me a little resistance. And now this is why I say you can't break it down so cleanly as just theory drills and live training. It's a continuum. Now your partner's giving you more resistance in the course of the drills. And eventually you start experimenting with this new technique that you learned from theory, practiced in drills. Now you're doing it on the mat in, say, if it's judo, in randori. And then maybe you're doing it in an actual match. And for me, having a primary interest in martial arts for their self-defense benefits, at some point, hopefully you will know that technique well enough so that you can deploy it under extreme adrenal stress, which would be a fight or combat or whatever. But it takes a lot to get there. So, but the same principles apply. Any new skill, any craft you're trying to learn, or your life itself, as you just said, Tony. Yeah. You can understand as involving these three elements.
I wanted to redirect here, and because it's interesting. Do you remember the first camp I invited you to? I had you also talk about writing, and it was a metaphor then. And I actually have I think it's in this stream here. There's some. That's you working with Wim on the left, right? Or
no, that's Rory Miller, another guy I've learned a ton from about violence. Great guy, super smart, insightful.
Yep.
And I've trained I've read a bunch of Rory's books. I did the foreword to one of them, and I've trained with him several times, and he's awesome.
Yep.
That's Rory, me messing him up, Rory. If you're hearing this, I was just messing him up there. He wasn't cooperating at all.
And Rory and I did a course called Convergence Evolution a few years ago. This is you're working with one of the smaller guys at one of our combatives camps. This is not, this is
a black belt photo shoot, right?
Holy shit. Look at me. I'm like 3 years old there.
You know what I remember about this? Somebody packed your gear and gave you two, the gloves. There were two left-handed gloves.
The wrong ones.
I think if somebody looks really closely, I was wearing the gear and one of the gloves is backwards because they were both for the right hand. And you were not unduly pissed, but you're like, come on.
I couldn't believe it. Elisa, where's that picture I sent you from the New York camp? It's not in that slide deck. Can you pop that up there? Do you have the one that I want? There's one I found a picture of. What's that?
Just a second, having technical issues.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I found a picture from Black Belt magazine or something. The gig we did in New York City. That's the one where you also did a block on writing, but it was again a metaphor of everything. I think the biggest takeaway from that is do something every day and watch it build. And this is, I'll let you elaborate on that. But gang, those of you who are into combat sports, martial arts, certainly wrestling, who's the most famous wrestler in America? Anyone think of like, he's a legend and his name just escaped me.
Oh, probably
Dan Gable. Yeah. And he said, if it's important, do it every day.
Yeah.
Great quote. But I remember you saying, if you want to write a book, you don't sit down and write like 400 pages. You write one page, but go ahead, take that, because that applies to push-ups, that applies to nutrition, that applies to
everything. Yeah. So the things that always interest me the most. I mean, look, if I'm giving a lecture to a bunch of people who are trying to learn more about writing, I'll tailor it very specifically to writing. I won't get into the meta that much because they're here for a specific purpose. But really, just the way my brain works, the stuff that interests me the most is usually the meta, the way principles express themselves across different endeavors. And I remember that talk, and I remember I'm looking at a bunch of people who are accomplished martial artists, and they're trying to take it to the next level, learn the spear system or whatever. And suddenly they're faced with this guy who's a writer, a novelist, and I could feel it, but it doesn't bother me. I've done a lot of public speaking, and the truth is, I like a hostile audience. You got nothing but room to persuade them. I'm like, I get it. You don't know who I am. You think I'm just a pointy-headed writer or something, and I have nothing to offer you about your endeavor. That's natural, but there's just a huge opportunity for me to be respectful and informative and win you over. So that kind of thing actually makes me happy.
If you can remember the other thought, because I'm curious. I don't like a hostile audience, and this is again like psychological predisposition. When I had there's a guy who's a former Army highest level, now retired, and he was in a squadron that I trained like years ago, pre and post 9/11.
Yeah.
And nobody on his forum knows who the hell I am because he's a gun guy.
Yeah.
He was talking about it. This is literally last night and this morning. And so Mike and I are talking offline about doing a video together to explain the neurobiology and the physiology of this problem. And there's people attacking me online because I went on and I said, hey, Mike, happy to jump in and share with your audience some elements of neurobiology and kinesiology. And these guys are going, and I'm like, don't get pissed, Tony. Don't get sarcastic. I don't like the hostile audience. And it's interesting is that something you learned from, like, don't read the YouTube comments or
That's a good question. I don't know when I realized this, but I do remember several times when I have faced a hostile audience and it's gone really well. And then I do my usual thing where I'm thinking, so you'd think that wouldn't have gone well, but it went really well. Why? And then I try to distill out the principles. And don't get me wrong, I like a friendly audience. I mean, who doesn't?
Right.
And I could tell you a lot of tricks about how to like warm up the audience. It's just stuff I've learned. I've done a lot of book signings, and like anything else, I'm like, well, if I'm going to be doing a lot of public speaking, I'm going to make a study of this thing. That's just how I seem to do things.
I'm going to book a private with you.
Sorry?
I'm going to book a private lesson with you. Because I'm
at least I could do after everything I've learned from you.
This guy said to me, yeah, I'm not interested in your science. And my answer to him to win him over was, I don't remember asking you.
So look, here's the thing. I mean, what's a hostile audience? We can get it. Like, there are audiences that you can't win over. You got to recognize that. You got people who are trolls. That's, the only rule of trolls is don't feed the trolls. Then you're just wasting your time. That's not what I'm talking about. I'll give you one quick example, since everybody, they say that public speaking is a universal fear. And there's a lot of bad advice, by the way, how to deal with that. They're like, oh, imagine your audience naked. I've never done that.
Right.
But I'm like, why would that help?
Stupid.
You?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just what everybody says to make them feel like, I don't know, like they're more human and they don't have power.
This is a good example of our psychological difference. You hear that and you would look at the person maybe who said, I heard this, or this is what I tell people, and go, I think that's bad advice. And I look at the same person, I go, that's stupid. Right?
Well, you're being very kind of
in the same place.
If my wife were here, she'd be like, oh no, Tony, you should hear him ranting over coffee in the morning.
Okay.
But then I try to turn it into something that'll be more productive for public facing conversations. But I don't think imagine your audience naked is good advice. Look, really quickly, I'll give some good advice,
please.
Which I learned from a guy named Roger Dawson, who wrote a book on negotiating called You Can Get Anything You Want in Life, but You Have to Do More Than Ask. Really good book. And he happened to be talking about public speaking in the book. And I remember him saying this. Just here are a couple tricks that I've tried to employ. I mean, tricks is the wrong word. It sounds manipulative. They're just, techniques.
Yeah.
When possible, I try to get to an event early, and I don't hang out in the green room. I like to go out into the audience before the thing starts. Maybe you have a handful of people there, 10% of the crowd, whatever, the early arrivals. And I chit chat with them. They're always surprised because very few people do this. I say, hi, I'm Barry Eisler. I'll be your speaker today. People usually laugh, and I ask them their name. Where are you from? What are you interested in? Whatever. By the time I get up on the stage, I've met a bunch of people in the audience, and we've made a connection. This is why you have warm-up acts in music or comedy. You warm up the audience. You do that yourself. By the way, this is something I hate that follows this. I'll spend 20 minutes warming up the audience. It's not work, by the way. I enjoy it. I'm just meeting people, and we're chatting. Then now I'm going to speak, and there'll be a moderator who drones on for 10 minutes about all the upcoming events because they got a captive audience. It's a time for like a commercial interruption. And by the time the audience is done, they have succeeded in cooling the audience down, and I got to warm them up again, sort of wasting all that previous work. But this is a good thing to do. And then when you take the stage, you're not scared. They're not strangers. You know these people. You've been chatting with them already. Now you're just going to talk some more. And they're looking at you, and they're smiling, and they're on your side. And that makes a big difference. Here's one more thing, and then I'll stop talking about this. Everybody does this. Don't do it. Don't stand behind a lectern. It cuts the audience off. It creates a physical barrier between you and the audience. Don't do it. Get rid of that lectern. Just stand out in front of the lectern.
Is lectern a pedantic word for the podium?
Yes. They're not the same thing.
They're not?
It is a neurosis of mine. I should probably apologize. Yeah, the lecturn's the thing that stands up. And you can put things on it. The podium is the thing you stand on.
Okay.
So and most people mix them up, which whatever.
I did that on purpose to help you share the difference.
So don't, and it's understood. People are afraid of the audience and they want that barrier, but that barrier prevents you from connecting with the audience. If you can get past that, then if you just do these two things, you'll immediately be a better public speaker. I can go on about it, but then, it's again, theory, drills, and practice. I learned these things. Okay. One last thing, because it's important. Get there early, even before anyone's in the audience. Stand on the stage or the podium or whatever, and just look at the room. Get used to being up there looking at the room. So you're not walking out there cold for the first time and saying, oh my God, that happened to me once. The biggest crowd I've ever spoken to, it was at a charity event for diabetes. There were 2,000 people in the audience. It wasn't my best gig. I wish I could do it over. And I had no idea. I'd never spoken to an audience that big. And it rattled me. And I wouldn't say I failed, but I didn't do my best. And it was because I walked out there and I was like, holy shit.
Right.
And I had a little trouble getting past that. So walk out there early, see the room, see how big it's going to be. What are the contours? By the way, self-defense stuff too. There's a great line in the John Frankenheimer movie. David Mamet wrote it. Ronin, Robert De Niro. This woman says, what were you doing outside? He was actually hiding a gun. What were you doing outside before? He says, lady, I never walk into a place I don't know how to walk out of. So that's a thing to do. Where are the exits? What's the egress, ingress, that kind of thing. This is for a different purpose, similar habits. Okay, so hostile audience really quickly. Look, if they're trolls, just don't feed the trolls. But here's one example. Some years ago, I was invited by the, I forget the full abbreviation. It's like the Association of Former Intelligence Professionals, something like that. They got a San Francisco chapter. Now, I'm barely a former intelligence official. I spent just under 3 years in a covert position in the CIA from 89 to 92. It was a super interesting experience. I'm glad I had it, especially for a future thriller writer. But my experience was limited. Mostly it was training. And I'm just not all that of the secret world former intelligence official set. But this was a gathering of 100 people who were the real deal from organizations like former, retired, whatever, CIA, FBI, NSA, Naval Investigative Service, serious people with serious careers. I mean, some of these people had as many as 30 years in service, and now they're retired. I was speaking alongside former NSA director and same guy, former CIA director, David Morrell. He had a book to promote, and I had a new novel to promote. And I was there to talk about why Edward Snowden did America a huge service, and the world actually a huge service. That he was not a traitor as he's usually described, but in my eyes, a hero. Now, this is my usual thing. Like you heard me talking about martial arts a minute ago. I'm like, this is my opinion. I'd like to talk about it. And of course we can differ, and that's what's going to make for an interesting conversation. But I'm the only guy in there. You can't see it now because I just got out of the shower, but long hair, some facial hair. Everyone else in there looked like kind of what you would imagine a retired government agent to look like, clean shaven, that kind of stuff. Right. So immediately they're looking at me, and I could feel it. 100 people. They're like, who's the hippie who's going to friggin' tell us that this traitor who violated his non-existent sacred vow of secrecy is some kind of hero? And I was expecting that. I was humble and respectful, which isn't hard for me because we should all be really, if you think about how much luck plays a determinant in your life, if you accurately analyze that, it'll make you humble. And why wouldn't I be respectful of all these people who have tremendous experience that I don't have? Different world experience, different professional experience. So that's not hard for me at all. And used a little humor, made my points in my gentle way, and I could see it as the as my talk went on. It was about 20 minutes, I think. People are like, I'm making points that 10 minutes ago they would have been, that's treason, Eisler, and instead they're like, yeah, that's actually, I see your point. I'm like, I just want to have a conversation. And by the end of it, a lot of people are coming up to me and saying, this happened at the talk I gave at your training seminar too. They're like, I got to admit, I was thinking, Jesus Christ, what's this guy going to be talking about? But that was actually really fair. And, I got a lot to think about. So I'm like, thank you. That's it. That's all I'm trying to do.
A lot of it is maybe pre-briefing people with the power of curiosity. Is like how can you actually turn off an unconscious bias? It's unconscious. It's my favorite joke. I go, well, you're wrong because you suffer from unconscious bias, but you can't fix that because it's unconscious. And we're like, fuck you, Blauer. Better to have a conscious bias. You've done the homework.
Those are easy.
Right. And so, no, that's fascinating. But if you can get them curious and get them to weigh and consider, one of my favorite quotes, and this actually has impacted a lot of relationships I've had over the years, betrayals over the years from people. It's like, I am relentless about trying to evolve and improve. And so I'm always, whether it's tweaking a lesson plan. I can remember I had a couple of my trainers way before Zoom, we would do every Sunday night, we'd meet on Skype and I would talk about things. And I'm not passionate about teaching. I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah.
And we would meet, and one of the guys, I'm not going to mention his name, ended up firing him. But I said, guys, I just came up with a new drill. I want you guys to try this on Wednesday. So you're going to spend a little time, change the PowerPoint. And this guy, they're all on Skype, and I see him go like this. And I said, bleep, whatever his name was, dude, I can see you. Body language is 60% of communication. What? I said, this course isn't for you, motherfucker.
Yeah.
It's for the cops in the class. You're retired. They're the ones moving towards the danger.
Yeah.
We're going to keep, but there was a quote I heard years ago, and it was, be willing to give up who you are today for who you could become tomorrow. And that really resonated with me. But a lot of people, this goes back to full circle, what you said right in the beginning, people don't want change. So as I changed, there was resistance to it. But it's, again, if you try to talk to somebody and go, hey man, be curious about this evolution, then if they have an unconscious bias towards not wanting to change, which most people do, like they've got to manufacture that you're the problem, not them.
So this is, this connects in so many ways to so many topics, but then you get into a question about the fundamental wiring of the human brain, which is part of what you do. Like, what's your brain going to do if you're ambushed, which is going to cause your body to do a certain thing. And instead of working against that, if you think about the way you've broken this down, your body's going to do what it does if you're ambushed. And there's so much data on this. Do we really even need to prove it?
Right.
And then the question is, how can we convert that into something useful, something tactically, physically, what's the word I'm looking for? Like kinesthetically, like biomechanically useful.
Right.
That can keep you in the fight and allow you to get past that startle flinch response and back into the fight. Hey, Jack, thank you for joining it.
Yeah.
I miss New Jersey.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting thing there, where you're like, look, I'm not trying to, I'm working with certain raw material that is predetermined. It's genetically determined.
Right.
I'm not trying to redesign it. I'm just looking at it in a pragmatic way. This is what it's going to do, and how can we work with that? And we haven't really talked much about politics, which is fine because we got plenty to talk about. But I'll say this: I'm pretty political, passionate about politics. But everything I do, I give it a lot of thought, and then I'm like, look, if I just have opinions and they don't change anyone else's mind, then it's not that they're not interesting me; they are. but then I haven't accomplished anything in the world. So like at that talk I gave to the foreign intelligence officials, my goal there was to get them to look at us the issue in a different way. Not so much to change their minds, but more like to open their minds, to get them to see something from a different angle. So how do I do that? I'm working with raw material, just like you are. Humans get wedded to certain position. We build personal brands around those positions, identities around those issues. And we hold on to those things. And here's another thing about our wiring. We're terrible at understanding why we really do things. See how all these things connect? A minute ago, I said one thing you want to do with characters if you're writing stories, one thing you want to be aware of, not in every single story, not necessarily in an action movie like Die Hard, you don't need to do it, but generally great characters, there's a gap, there's a dichotomy between what they think they want and what they really need. That's human. So we do things for certain reasons, but we're really doing it for something else. In a self-defense setting, it might be, well, I had no choice, man. I had to fight him. I had to knock him out. And it's like, did you really? Or was that a script you have in your head about like what a man does if somebody, insults him or something? I don't know. Everyone's different, but we're not very good at knowing why we really do things. So if you're trying to persuade someone, you got to look for ways to get past the fact that they don't want to hear what you're going to say because it challenges beliefs that they're comfortable with, and is on some level you're saying, I want you to change the way you look at the world a little bit. We know 80% of people are going to instinctively resist that no matter what. And it's complicated. It's not easy. You can't do it with a frontal assault. Can't do it with the things that maybe you think are going to be most effective. One quick example of something that fascinates me in this regard. Look at the kind of bullshit that goes on in the comment section of YouTube or anywhere on the internet. I mean, not 80% of it is vile, and 60% of it is useless. And, not just vile, it's not vile, but it's useless. Right. Like only a very small percentage of internet conversation and comments has any kind of utility. And why is that? Because people think they're trying to persuade. They tell themselves, I'm trying to persuade this guy. That's why I got to insult him. That's why I got to say, you're a total idiot, shithead. You don't know the first thing about whatever. And if you ask him, like, look, he doesn't want to make any sense. I was just trying to persuade him. But everybody knows that literally not one person in the history of the world has ever been persuaded by an insult. We understand that about the other humans. Right. It's like you can't really be doing it. You're telling yourself that, but why are you really doing it? Really, honestly, you're jacking off. I've said this to many people. On my page, they start insulting someone. I'm like, no, we don't do it that way. Here we argue to persuade. They're like, oh, it was just. I'm like, no, you were doing that to self-pleasure. And there's nothing wrong with self-pleasuring, but it is an undignified thing to do in public, especially on my page. Do it in private, not in public. Wow. So I try to look for ways to get people to see things differently. I know I'm going on and on about this.
You've mastered the art of.
No, that's nice of you to say. I'm a long way from mastering any art, and I don't always live up to these ideals because I'm human. But I will say this: if you look at the other humans, you'll recognize that one fundamental thing is if people don't feel respected, they will not listen to you. You're done. So you're going to have to find a way. This person's your enemy, your adversary. They have a different ideology or a different way of looking at the world. Okay. If you disrespect them, if you visibly disrespect them for any of that, you will never, ever persuade them. That's probably 30 to 70% of what's wrong with America today. But whatever. People don't listen.
This is fucking great. It's pissing me off.
Yeah, it's very important to me that
it's pissing me off because I recognize, my instincts certainly online. I think I'm way better. Certainly, again, to go back to the word, of you saying it's iterative. When I had, I remember, being rudely challenged by a contrarian in the 80s, and my answer to his question was I sucker punched him to the body and dropped him because the conversation was going anywhere. But it was yeah, but if I did this and I did that, and like going, but you wouldn't even know in like an ambush when it was happening. No, because I go, dude, if somebody who understands sucker punching wants to drop you, if they truly have analyzed it, you don't even know. I just whack, I fucking hit him with a body shot, and he's, it didn't hurt him, but he was over.
Yeah, I get it.
But that was 20-year-old Tony. and I could think about it. I remember getting jumped at a seminar in Australia in the 90s and being so angered by it, I almost quit teaching. I was so angered because I was there truly. I come in and go, I'm only trying to make you safer. Kind of almost, and this might be one of the reasons why you and I have sustained a relationship for such a long time, is there's so much interleaving in our principles. We explain it differently. You're turning 60, I'm 62. I mean, we're in that, but when this happened, I wasn't like, okay, the next guy. I was like, I literally wrote in my journal that day, I'm never teaching again. If this is what me trying to make people safer is gonna, I'm gonna have a target on my back. But my next seminar, I remember flying back from Australia, and I was flying right to New York City and right into another gig. And there was all these, there was 40 people in the seminar. I only knew 3 of the people there. And I said, listen, I got jumped in Australia. Obviously, I managed the violence and stopped it because I'm here. I said to the group, I contemplating fucking giving up teaching self-defense publicly because I was so disgusted by the attack. I said, so let me explain to you right now, these are the rules of engagement for our seminar. If you go, and this is word for word, if you go outside the drill and I think you're trying to either embarrass me or hurt me, I will defend myself with extreme prejudice. Now, and everyone looked at me and the room got really quiet. I said, there's usually one fucking asshole in the audience who's looking at me like in the original Roadhouse. I thought it'd be bigger. I go, if you're that guy, here's what I want you to do right now. Put your hand up and identify yourself as the guy that's going to ruin the fucking day, and I will refund your money now, and you could just fucking leave. And what does everyone do in the room, Barry, right? Everyone's like, but the seminar went very smooth, but it was like, I did not enjoy that, but it wasn't a very Alan Watts approach to the Zen of
well, that's to me, that's just a version of a heckler. And I mean, I could go on and on about this stuff, but all right, really quickly. For me, one of the fundamental laws of human nature is that humans abhor powerlessness. We're attracted to power, but it's not exactly a flip side of a coin. Abhorring powerlessness is its own thing. And the most basic form of power is the power to hurt, the power to destroy, whatever. You don't have to have any skill. Anybody can do it. And so this is where hecklers come from, trolls come from, that guy you mentioned at the seminar. Anybody can kick you in the shins if you're dancing. You're not ready for it. You're not thinking about it. It's supposed to be cooperative. So, when you're in, one of the things I learned in government training a long time ago at counter-terrorist training, and then at the same time I was reading it in a guy named Mark McYoung, another self-defense guy who I've learned a lot from. His first book, this is 1989, Cheap Shots, Ambushes, and Other Lessons. And he's talking about, a lot of people have expressed this in different ways. Code white, code yellow, code orange, code red. Different people give different colors. But the point is, look, right now, if somebody just pops into my office where we're having this conversation, it will be hard for me to get in the game. The doors are locked, the windows are locked. I'm in my own house, my own office, and I'm really focused on our conversation. That's how I am in my house. So we learned that, out in the world, you want to be more in condition yellow, which is, you're not like, what's going on? I got to be ready for anything. But you have a shorter transition to make if something really goes wild. By the way, I'm going to mention something that was really useful when I was teaching my daughter to drive. And so I'm going to mention it. When you first start telling people about these, some sort of color-coded system, condition white is you are completely relaxed. If you get ambushed when you're in condition white, it's going to be hard for you. Hopefully you've trained in the spear system and your body's going to convert a genetically inspired startle flinch reaction into something tactically useful, which, with the outside 90 and your fingers splayed, and you're going to...
Guys, okay, let's stop the whole call right now. That was perfect. We got that one take. That's our commercial. Thank you.
Hopefully you'll be able to do that. But no matter what, if you started a condition white, you're going to need more time for your body and your mind to get in the game. But if you're condition yellow is more like, you're alert. I'm out in the world now. there could be a problem. Condition orange is you identify something that specifically looks like it could be a problem. And that is one step away from condition red, which is action, whether it's running away or fight or whatever. The closer you are to condition red, the less time it's going to take you to get there. And this is a concept a lot of people initially resist. I probably did. I don't remember, it was so long ago when I first came across it, because what they say is like, that sounds really hard. I'm going to be exhausted, right? You're going to be in condition yellow all the time when I'm out in the world. The truth is, condition yellow is the condition you are in when you're driving, or it should be. If you're parked, no, that's fine. I mean, you can just be, texting or whatever it is you're doing when you're parked. But if you think about it, when people talk about defensive driving, you're talking about condition yellow. And the longest drive I've ever had solo in a day was over 800 miles from dawn to dusk. It was about 15 hours. It was very tiring, but you can drive that far in condition yellow. It's just alertness. Like, what are the other drivers do? Are there any problems? And then if somebody looks like he's doing something a little that doesn't look good, like he's weaving a little in front of me up the road or whatever, you start to progress into condition orange. You're giving that guy a little bit more attention. And if that guy suddenly does something crazy, you're much more likely to survive it, to be able to react to it effectively if you're moving into that evasive maneuver from condition orange. But if you're just, whatever, doing your thing, and that guy suddenly cuts into your lane, and he was doing all these pre-event indicators, we would call it in a violent situation, but it's the same concept in driving. He's giving you all the signs in the world. He's weaving, whatever, maybe he's drunk, and you don't see any of that. Suddenly he cuts you off and doesn't give you any room, and you have not given yourself time and space to react. I'm not saying that's on you, but later when you're like, he came out of nowhere. Not really. It was there. If you were in condition yellow, you would have spotted it when you had enough time and space to react effectively. So for anyone who finds that concept of condition yellow, condition orange, it's just the way you drive. It's exactly what we do instinctively when we drive.
It's fun and not surprising that you use that. We use that too. And I've actually done an article on it saying, like, if you are a pretty decent driver, then you can easily enhance your survivability or make a connection to your self-defense IQ by extrapolating, I've got these skills here. And we talk about that. If you can improve your perception speed, you can improve your reaction time. And your perception speed, you can do that in training. You can do that in reverse engineering scenarios and analyzing real events, going, what happened before, what happened before, what happened?
Right.
Because that would inform. And this is interesting because conventional block-based self-defense training starts after the attack. Here's what you do to block a punch. Here's what you do if the gun's in your face. This is the takeaway. Here's how you get out of a headlock. People don't notice that you're starting your movement after the attack. Right. And in the consideration of that learning, there is no accountability in the training protocol for the psychological and emotional duress that is going to influence how effectively you move. Yeah. So, from my original presumed compliance article, which I'm not sure you've read, how you think affects how you feel affects how you think, both influence when and how you will move. And people don't talk about that enough. That's brain-based versus block-based training.
Totally makes sense. This is one of the things you've done that I love. I use this concept in a lot of different areas. You call it uncommon sense. Like you point out that most of our training, we start by, we're like, okay, put up your dukes or whatever, right? Like, that kind of thing. Like you start from a consensual, agreed upon fighting position, and then you start sparring. I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with that as such. It's kind of shortcut to an aspect of training you're trying to get to, but I would say it's incomplete if what you're trying to model is what might happen in the real world. So you thought about this and you're like, how often do violent encounters happen outside the dojo where the two people consensually agree to adopt a kind of dueling stance and then get down to it? Not that many. So you're thinking, okay, so let's start from the position you will probably find yourself in if you are surprised by the violence. And then people say to you, they're like, well, Tony, that's just common sense. You're like, hey, if it were common sense, everybody would be pointing it out. Everybody would be talking about it, but they're not. And you call that uncommon sense. I use that all the time now. Like anytime you point something out that's, I don't know, I'm not saying, like, if I come up with an original thought, I never think that in all of human history, nobody's figured this out before. That's stupid. But But I did come up with it, I think myself, based on other things I've learned from other people or whatever. And then I'll be like, you know what I think? Blah, blah, blah. And if somebody says, well, that's just obvious.
Right.
Why isn't everybody? A lot of people don't seem to be aware of that. Just as a quick example to go back to it, is it obvious that the other humans will never listen to you if you treat them disrespectfully? It is obvious, I think, but not nearly enough people seem to practice this. So I wouldn't call it just common sense. Common sense is like if I need to hang a picture, and it's a small picture in a light frame, I can use a small nail. That's, I don't have to drill a hole in the wall and screw in a 4-inch bolt. That's common sense. Nobody has problems with that. You don't see many people putting a 4-inch bolt in the wall to hang a 6-ounce picture from. They don't, that's common sense. But these other things, maybe we know them on some level, but we're not practicing them. And that's important.
I think if I can, and remember, you made me think about, Alan Turing and the Enigma code, and they had all these guys that trying to break the German code in World War II. And when he finally did it, everyone in the room, which some of those guys, that was the beginning of the CIA and all of that. I mean, it was the smartest guys in the world trying to break the Enigma code. And then Turing, is it Turing or Turing?
Turing, I think is how it's pronounced. But yeah.
So he figures it out, and as soon as he figured out, they all went, well, duh, obviously, right? And so something happens, and I talk about this in our system with the 3 I's: instincts, intuition, intelligence. When you can find the intersection, you have the aha moment, and that's, I think, some of the problems I've experienced in the self-defense world, where I've made this connection to neurobiology, kinesiology, and psychology, and explained it, and then people do it and they go, oh, well, I could have figured that out. and it's literally no, you couldn't have. You figured it out the same way somebody else broke the code.
It only seems obvious in retrospect. I'll give you two really quick examples of this that I find fascinating, because yes, they seem incredibly obvious in retrospect, but people didn't know them. So it used to be that if you fell off a boat or something into the water, we're all, I mean, if you've ever learned to swim or whatever, you're trained, you learn to tread water. That's good. I mean, that's an important life skill, but it's very tiring to tread water. And at some point, somebody was looking at this and they're like, do you really need to do this to stay alive in the water? Do you really need to have your head above water? And most people, almost everyone, would say, hell yes, you need your head above the water to breathe. What are you going to do? And what this person said is, that's not true. You don't need to have your head above water to breathe. What are you talking about? That's crazy. Of course you do. You only have to have your head above water to inhale. Mm-hmm. And that changed the approach. It's still good to know how to tread water for a lot of different reasons, but this was the beginning of what's now called, at least when I was taking life-saving when I was a teenager, the survival float. And if you're going to be out there and you're waiting a long time for rescue, you can just relax and let your face fall into the water as you exhale. Raise it up to inhale, plunk it back down again, exhale. And you can do that for a lot longer than you can tread water. So this is an incredible insight, which once it's pointed out to you, seems incredibly obvious. The other one that's like this, when I came across it, I was like, damn, because it seems so obvious. The early days of video compression. I don't know how, I'm not very technical, and I don't know how important these things are now that we have fatter pipes. But in the early days of streaming video over the internet, the amount of data represented by video was just too much for the pipes. So you get jerky video, you couldn't get quality video. They're like, what are we going to do? Because it's 30 frames a second. Yeah, that's a lot of data to stream over these pipes. What can you do? Somebody had the insight of, if you think about a video like the one we're looking at right now, very little is changing in these in the image of you and the image of me, frame to frame. It's almost all static. There's only very small things that are moving, like my hand's moving now, but everything else is static. And somebody came up with an algorithm to say, you know what, if it's not moving frame to frame, we're just going to have a marker that says, don't change this in the video. Only the things that are moving will have data showing it changes in the following way. And they were able to save a lot of space sending data down pipes doing this. And I'm sure that whoever first figured this out got a lot of responses like, duh.
Right.
It's like, well, why didn't you come up with MP3 or whatever it was, MPEG compression technology? Why didn't you do it?
Very.
Uncommon sense.
That was nerdy. That last period. Hey, let me. We're at an hour 15. I can't believe how long this gone by.
We're way past people's 280 character attention.
Yeah, like but you know, most of the people have stayed with us. I really appreciate that. And we got a couple of questions I want to get to. But when did you know you wanted to be a writer? What was that transition?
When I was a kid, I used to always. I used to write a lot. I used to write short stories. I remember I'd go sometimes stay at my grandmother's and grandfather's place down on the Jersey Shore for a week or two when my parents went away alone someplace together. And my grandmother had an old typewriter. It wasn't old at the time. It was a mechanical typewriter. Probably a lot of people listening don't even know what that thing is. Exactly. It wasn't even electric.
Right.
Clunk, 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 clunk. And I used to write short stories when I was down there. And I suck at more things than we have time to talk about, but I'm not being immodest in saying I think I was born with a certain amount of talent for writing. And so naturally, I somehow I used to read a lot of books, gravitated toward writing, used to write stories, like I was saying. Every job I've ever had, I became known as the guy to go to if you needed something written, marketing copy, a business plan, whatever. I don't know why it took me so long to put two obviously related thoughts together. One is I loved reading novels. I've always read a lot. I've never met a writer who isn't a big reader. It's not going to happen for a variety of reasons. One is inclination and the other is just the practice, like the osmotic practice. But it took me till I was 29 or 30 before I put together two incredibly obviously connected thoughts. One is, well, you're a pretty good writer and you think it would be cool to be a novelist. Like that would be a good way to earn a living. Have you ever tried writing a novel? I can't believe it took me till I was 29, 30 to think maybe I can do this and have an idea that maybe this could be turned into something. You could, if you stay with this, maybe it could turn into a novel. So that's my story of how I became a writer. It wasn't an always thing. I was always good at it, always sort of interested in it, but it took me until I was almost 30 before I really gave it a shot.
There's something that you, I think it's on one of your pages, and I was looking at it in preparation for this talk, that every location and every book you've been to, these are actual, is that you would think that anybody who writes would do that to describe it effectively, but is that not the case?
So this is another thing I would say. This works for me, but I wouldn't say you have to do this. And I once read an interview with Eric Van Lustbader that I loved, because if anybody doesn't know Eric, I used to read his books when I was in high school and college. I used to read about his first big book was The Ninja, and then it was like White Ninja, and like a lot of kind of fantasy martial arts, Asian fantasy kind of stuff that I used to love. And someone once asked him, so his books have to do with ninja, Japanese stuff. And the interviewer said, have you ever been to Japan? And Eric Van Lustbader said, oh no, I don't want to go to Japan. If I see the real Japan, I'm afraid it would interfere with the fantasy Japan I'm trying to depict in my novels. And I think that is a 100% coherent, impressive, defensible answer. There's nothing whatsoever wrong with it. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's writing fiction. He's not pretending this is history or something. And it's good fiction. I used to love these books. So that's one kind of fiction. But my fiction is, I try to make it much more grounded in reality in every way. The physical, the settings, the martial arts and violence sequences, the operator tactics, counter surveillance, dead drops, like tradecraft as I learned it when I was in the CIA, plots that are, to use the cliche, ripped out of the headlines. I try to do things like reading between the lines of what's really going on in the world. It's just, for whatever reason, the way my head seems to work and the kind of stories I most enjoy writing. So that's why I do it that way. I wish I could say I've been to every single place I've ever written about, most of them for sure. And I've made a big effort, but occasionally something will happen, like the pandemic, for example, which can interfere with one's plans. Like my latest book, Amok, is set it's bookended in a little town called Tuscola outside of Abilene, Texas. But the meat of the story takes place in Timor. and the whole story takes place in 1991. So I can't time travel. That's one challenge you're always going to have. But I really wish I could have visited Timor, which is exactly the kind of thing I like to do. But I couldn't. It was just during the pandemic. It was going to be too much.
Sure.
But I'll say this: technology is a big help. Like it used to be much harder to write about places persuasively, convincingly, if I hadn't been to them. But now you got Google Maps and tons of uploaded user-generated content, not just photographs, but videos. So you can get the feel of a place, not just from how it looks in a still photo, but how it looks and sounds with video. And that is a big advantage if you're trying to do something that's convincing on the page. Can I tell you one last thing that's funny about this? Go for it. I've been to Thailand a few different times, and various Thai locations have appeared in several of my books. But one of these books, The Night Trade, for various reasons, I couldn't make it back. I like to get back to refresh my recollection and get the details right when I can. So I couldn't visit this place called the Rat Phi Night Market. But I did my usual thing, which was to go deep online, like watching, people with GoPro cameras on their hats or in their shirts or whatever, walking through the night market and all the uploaded user-generated photographs. I mean, I spent a lot of time going through the Rat Phi Night Market remotely. And then at some point I was, I think I was looking at the book again. I can't remember exactly. And what popped up in my brain was, oh yeah, I remember that time walking past that outdoor golf course with the netting. And then I stopped and I was like, wait a minute. That was a trip you weren't able to make it. And I was like, no, I can swear. It was just very interesting for me how I was actually able to fool even myself. And there's probably a lesson there with regard to witness testimony in criminal cases. I'm not saying it's totally unreliable, but the brain is a funny thing. Recollection is a funny thing. Anyway, it was just a moment where I got to laugh at myself because it was, you weren't there.
That's that nerdy self-awareness thing where you go, did I imagine that? Did that really happen? Because if the brain's abstraction skills, it knows A, it knows C, you figure out B, and then you're like, but like, was I this? Especially now, with the changes in artificial intelligence and also consuming stuff where you're not sure. Hey, I've got some heavier questions I want to ask you. I want to be mindful of your time, my time, but there are a couple of comments here from some of your fans. I'll pop this one up. Check that out. Donald just finished.
Thank you, Donald.
Yeah. Nice. Right. And then
that was easy. Yeah. I think you'll see more rain. I'm working on a bunch of things right now. I feel like right now I've got like 4 planes on a single runway and I'm trying to get them all into the air. But yeah, I think you'll see John rain. Thank you for asking.
Good. And then here's another one from Stress Judo.
You're really nice.
Let's read it out.
I want to say it's like, you got to remember one thing. I'm writing novels, so I do violence really well in the novels, but that's like playing a doctor on TV. You wouldn't want that person to really operate on you because I have all the time in the world to imagine these things and choreograph them. The connection between that and doing something to save your life is probably tenuous. I know a few things. I'm not trying
to. There are some people who aren't watching this that it might be on an audio stream, so I'm just going to read it. The comment was, Barry, since as Tony mentioned, you're so good at the mental element of violence, have you considered writing from a villain's perspective, specifically of a villain in a Live Alone novel?
Yeah. Not only have I considered it, one of the really fun things one of the things that's so fun for me as a novelist is to try to get in the heads of my villains, because the one thing you got to understand about the other humans is none of them looks in the mirror and sees a villain looking back. It's never like that. Choose your big villain. It doesn't matter who it is, someone you hate or some politician or whatever. That person does not agree with you, doesn't think that he or she is a villain. They probably think you're the villain and they're the hero. So you got to remember that, and that makes building a character and understanding the villain, where the villain's coming from, even if you don't show it so explicitly on the page, but you got to understand your villain has justifications by definition. Otherwise the villain wouldn't do what she does. Right. So that's a really fun thing for me. And I think I would say I've done it. I mean, in Amok, we got a guy named Joko, who's an Indonesian special forces soldier operating in Timor during the Indonesian occupation of East Timor. And Joko's a sociopath. Joko believes that if you eat the heart of your enemy, you'll gain your enemy's strength, and he'll eat your heart. So and he's able to justify all these things. Mm-hmm. Specifically an Olivia novel, my Olivia novel, All the Devils, which also Docs is part of that character too, because he and Livia seem to have a thing going. All the Devils, I love that title because that's from Shakespeare. Hell is empty and all the devils are here. I'm like, it's about the villains, and you're in these guys' heads as they're doing the most heinous things, some of the most heinous things you can imagine. Hey, thank you for that. So yeah, I think not only would I consider doing it, I'd say I have done it, hopefully effectively, but I'll leave that up to my readers.
Nice. That'd be interesting if Hollywood picks up on that. That's kind of like that anti-hero type thing where you're enjoying the bad guys. Here's more of a generic one, and more of a
my parents went to Seton Hall.
Yeah. So for those of you who can't see this, Donald writes, this is more just back referring to the martial arts and the judo. Started with judo in college, and then studying under 2 exchange students from Japan who were in their black belts at the Kodokan. It stood me well over the decades, and with every other martial art trained in, great foundation. Let me scroll up here. Police officer from the UK, done 1 spear course 3 months ago, got 2 more books. So I was a little jealous that you were getting all the comments, so I threw them in for
well, everybody knows you here. I'm your special guest.
Right, I'm your special guest. Here's a good one. Barry's just talking to a friend about your books. Anything new on the TV front for John Rain, film or series? I remember years back it was being shopped around.
Yeah, so the short answer to that is IMDb, for reasons I don't know anything about IMDb other than I love it. I think it's the reason the internet was invented, but it's often not very current. So about 8 or 9 years ago, Keanu Reeves was attached to play John Rain, and that development project ultimately didn't go anywhere. So that one's dead, but there's a new group that is trying to develop the Rain books for television. And I would describe them as a smart group of passionate, capable people who really get the character and the possibilities for television. Nothing that it's not like I'm bound by secrecy. I mean, like nothing to report yet, because in my experience, statistically, these things don't make it. I mean, if you had to bet and you could bet even odds, you should always bet against anything being making it all the way to the screen. Just because, again, you just have so much product chasing, even in the golden age of streaming television with Netflix and Amazon and Apple and Hulu and Disney and Paramount and Amazon Prime. I mean, it's even with all that product, there's still so much more product that can fit in the available distribution.
It's probably even, well, not probably. And again, I just say this intuitively, the likelihood of you, not you personally, but like anyone getting a TV show or movie produced and then released is greater than the likelihood of you getting picked up by a publisher on a book.
So I don't know for a fact, but it's daunting odds.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm going to digress, but it's super short, because I think this is really important. I heard some really good advice from Jean-Claude Van Damme way back in the day. It was on one of the late night talk shows. And I know, Tony, you've been mixed up with him on the cover of any number of black belt magazines. Right. The last thing the talk show host asked him was, do you have any advice for people, for martial artists, people generally, whatever? And Jean-Claude Van Damme said, believe in yourself. And I thought, that is really good advice. On some level, it's aspirational. And so like any aspiration, you want to break it down into things you can actually do. But what I would say is this, recognize the odds are daunting if you're trying to write a novel, or if you're trying to become a black belt in a martial art or whatever, because just statistically, most people who start down that path drop out at some point. Or if you're trying to write something and get it made into a movie or into a television show, the statistical odds are daunting. And so what should keep you going, in my opinion, is not so much like, I'm going to make this happen, and if it doesn't happen, I've failed, I'm a failure, whatever. It's not like that. You just want to be in a position at the end of your life where you don't have to have any regrets. You don't have to wonder, what would have happened if I just kept working on that manuscript for an hour a day? Do you think I could have gotten published? Well, if you don't write that manuscript, I can tell you the answer. No, you will not get published because you didn't write the manuscript. If you do write the manuscript, you at least got a shot. You bought a lottery ticket. There's a chance. And that's your job. Your job isn't to get published or to make the TV show or even to get the black belt or whatever necessarily. It's to control all the things you can control, influence all the things you can influence, to make it as likely as possible that that outcome you want does happen, knowing that you can't guarantee it. And I think that's the right attitude. So the television.
I got to interrupt there. That's again, like rock solid advice for anything. Do the work, right? And a lot of people fixate on the outcome. Why can't I be rich? Why can't I be famous? Why can't I have that body? I got bad genetics. I was born, I was born to the wrong parents. I was born in the wrong time. And like, that doesn't serve you.
Yeah. Totally agree. So I try to focus on doing the things I can do to reduce my susceptibility to bad luck, increase my susceptibility to good luck. That's my job. By the way, because the way these principles express themselves in common in disparate fields always interests me. I'll mention something I learned from Masad Ayub. A lot of people listening, you might know Masad Ayub. He's a gun guy. He's an expert in lots of a legal expert in criminal cases. He's a former cop and a recognized expert on firearms. And I got to train with Mas years ago at his course used to be called Lethal Force Institute. It's changed. I forget what it is now. But here's one of the things that interested me because it made so much sense as a kind of life principle. So Mas breaks down combat shooting, into component parts, and they're smooth draw, aggressive stance. I'm going to pantomime, but a smooth draw, aggressive stance, guerrilla grip, front sights on the target, roll the trigger. Those 5 component parts of getting the bullets to go where you want them to go. And that's, if you focus on those things, and I'm not much of a shooter, and I was even less of a shooter when I took Mas's course, but it was interesting to me that if I did exactly what he said to do, which was stop thinking about the target and start thinking about the component parts, you can control those things or manage them better than you can manage that out there goal. You'll notice that you become a better shooter. The bullets start hitting where they're supposed to go. And he's got countless anecdotal data of cops who wound up in shootouts. And this is kind of what you're talking about, Tony, where the ambush happens and like your genetics are going to take, there's a startle flinch. And again, what those cops say is their initial, in their terror, like somebody's shooting at them and they get their gun out and they're shooting back and they're like, die, or like drop him, like shoot him, hit him. And the bullets are going not where they're supposed to go. And then the training kicks in, which is, front sights on the targets, on the target, guerrilla grip, roll the trigger. And almost like, oh, it's a miracle. The bullets hit the guy and he fell down. And that really interested me because I'm like, that is a thing that you can apply in your life. Again, like writing a novel. Stop thinking about like, when I'm at a book signing or something, and just do the work today. Just write however many words you're going to write today. I've written 18 novels and 4 short stories. It's pretty much, and some teleplays and screenplays too, none of which tragically has been made yet, but still done a lot of writing. My point is this: when I start a new book, even with all that experience, I look at the screen and I'm like, holy shit, how am I going to write 100,000 words roughly? That's a lot of words, 400 pages, whatever it is. And what I've learned to do is don't think about that. That's too big. What are you going to do today? Okay, today I'm going to write, I don't know what it's going to be, 500 words. A good day for me is 2,000. But just do the work today, do it again tomorrow, and pretty soon a month has gone by, 2 months, 3 months. You'd be amazed at how much you've accomplished. Doesn't guarantee you'll get published, but it makes it possible, and that's your job.
Amazing. I was distracted trying to find that picture of me with it was on the cover of Inside Karate. Where a lot of people thought it was Van Damme. I don't look like that anymore. I will want to show this from a long, long time ago, where this is from our first camp together.
I remember this.
You know,
in Central Park,
and man, did we have a blast there? That was a great time. Okay.
Oh, and that's from, that was in I think that's a Black Belt magazine article, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Black Belt mag. Okay. I got a couple of questions for you. Because this is the No Fear podcast. In general, don't let this be the beginning treatise of a new novel. What have you learned about fear just in your life? If your daughter said to you, Dad, talk to me about fear. Easy one.
So what I would say is it's a real thing. And I would track it the way you track, like if you get ambushed, your body's going to do a startle flinch response. Don't fight that. Don't think it's something that you can eliminate. It's part of your genetic heritage. It's there for a reason. It must be. Why would God or nature have instilled everybody with fear if it were just, if it were purposeless? So accept it as part of your nature and try to manage it rather than fight or eliminate it in ways that are ultimately useful. That's not too much of a novel, right? But if you want to go deep on this, I would recommend a book by Gavin de Becker. Tony, I know you know of it. It's called The Gift of Fear. A lot of people listening have heard of it. It's a fantastic book. And I'm gonna do my usual thing, but it's really short. I'm gonna connect two things. It's fascinating. One of the things Gavin de Becker talks about is this: it is the nature of fear. That fear is about the thing that hasn't happened yet. If the thing is happening or has happened, you're not afraid of it anymore by definition. So I think this is his example. You're in your house at night and you hear a sound in the yard and you're afraid that there could be somebody out there. And you look through the curtains and, oh my God, there's someone in the backyard. Now you're not afraid of a person being in your backyard anymore. Now you're afraid of, what is this person going to do? Is he going to try to get in my house? And suddenly the window gets smashed in and the person jumps through the window and is in your house. You're not afraid of the person being in the house anymore. That's happened. Now you're afraid, what is this person going to do? Is he going to kill me? Is he going to rape me? Is he going to rob me? The fear is always about the thing that hasn't happened yet. Right. This is the least of his book. There's so much great information in here about how fear is genetically inspired. It comes from a place. You're not going to eliminate it. Learn why it's there. Learn how it can be used and relied on for useful things. But the connection that interests me is what Gavin de Becker describes about fear is the same for any kind of compelling writing. That suspense is always about the thing that hasn't happened yet. And so I'll give you one quick example of this for anybody who wants homework, and it's the best homework you'll ever get. Go watch Inglourious Bastards, because Quentin Tarantino is as good as this at anybody I've ever encountered. The opening scene of that movie is almost 20 minutes long. That is a fantastically long time to have a scene in a movie. It's a single scene. It's where Christoph Waltz, the Gestapo colonel or whatever he is, Hans Lander goes to the French farmer's house to interrogate him. And that scene goes on for almost 20 minutes. It's extraordinary. Right. And if you analyze what makes that scene so compelling, it's that Quentin Tarantino, in his own words, because I watched him interviewed about this, he's like, suspense is like a rubber band and you want to stretch it as far as you can keep until finally it has to break. And fear is like that. Suspense is like that. And art, depending on the kind of art, if you're telling stories for a living, you should have that in mind. Once the thing happens, nobody's suspenseful about that thing anymore. So you better be sure that it's going to lead to the next thing that they're going to be suspenseful about. Anyway, I sorry you asked me for a short answer, and I seem
no, that was great. It's great. Just as an aside, we found the cover where people thought it was Van Damme.
Hey man, that is Van Damme,
right? And back in the what year is that? I can't even see that. Holy shit!
Like 5 or 10 years ago.
Oh my God, way longer than that, dude.
I'm joking.
That was close to 30 years ago. Pretty wild. But anyways, no, that was a great example for all the stuff with the Gavin DeBecker. Like all anxiety is a worrying about the future, and it's not easy just to say, "Oh, it's just this," because fear is real. And then there's some memes out there and some schools of thoughts that say, "Well, imagine fear isn't real because it's this." I go, "Well, if it's fucking producing cortisol and keeping you up at night, or gives you a heart attack, or ruins your life, then it's fucking real. So how dare you say that?" But I just wrote an interesting article. I just wrote an interesting article last week in my Substack. And if you're not following me on Substack, guys, you should follow it, because I'm putting all of my old and my new writings up there. You can communicate, like you can leave messages on stuff. So on the Substack, I wrote an article where I talk about the difference between actual fear that's triggered by a stimulus in front of you. And so your instincts, your intuition, and your hardwiring respond. You get the physiological response, but also imagine fear, which is where you're the producer, you're the director, you're the screenwriter, and you've cast yourself as victim number one in the horror movie in your mind. And a lot of people do that worrying about the future. So that's all part of the No Fear program that everyone should be investing in anyhow. And that's the name of this podcast. So another fear question. Obviously, fear and fear management has shown up in how you manage negotiation, because I remember when on the sly you were saying to me, "Hey, Keanu Reeves is like, that's huge. Your brain can't stop thinking, oh my God, that would change my life." And you've got to manage the Mas Ayub protocol. What are the steps I need to do, instead of just be thinking about, "Okay, honey, what are we going to do with all this money?"
Right.
So it's managing fear as a writer. Hey, you got a deadline, and you're like, fuck. Do you ever experience writer's block?
No. And not because
I knew you were a unicorn.
No, but it's funny. People, I do book signings, and sometimes I do interviews and stuff. And people ask questions about my process, that kind of thing, which I'm always open to. My process interests me. It's my process, but I always try to be careful. Like, I never want to just say, like, this is just some idiosyncratic thing I do that nobody else can learn from. And when I say I don't have a problem, I've never had a problem with writer's block, it's not because I'm special. And if it were, I wouldn't want to even talk about it, because what could someone else do with that? I think the reason I don't have a problem with writer's block is because I'm constantly feeding my imagination. I have a lot of interests. And so if you talk to a lot of writers, a lot of fiction writers, one common element I think you'll come across is that they get inspired by the what if question. And then the underlying question is, where does the what if question comes from? Like, if I seem to remember ages ago reading an interview with Michael Crichton, and like, where did you come up with Jurassic Park? And he was reading an article about genetic splicing or something like that, because he had a medical degree and read those journals. And then his mind just paused and thought, what if somebody did this with dinosaur DNA? Could you grow a dinosaur? What if? And from there, he built out this. And then it's, you got to keep asking questions about who this and why that. And it turns into a novel. But if you are interested, if you're passionately interested in certain areas, and I am, so that you read about those things almost every day, listen to podcasts, or however you get your information, your mind is just going to continually be turning this stuff over and examining it and playing with it. And then questions are going to just pop up. Those what if questions will arise in your head. Now, because I always like to give, anytime I'm giving any kind of advice, I don't like it to be aspirational. Not that there's anything wrong with aspirations. It's just that you can't do anything with them directly. Try to break it down into more usable, actionable information. And so you're feeding your imagination, you get a what if question. Okay, wow, I came up with something really cool. Like what would happen? What if somebody did this with dinosaur DNA? But yeah, Barry, how do I get from that to a 100,000 word novel and then a best-selling series or whatever, like, blockbuster series of movies based on my novels? It's simple. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it's simple. You got to ask the basic questions, which are who, what, where, when, why, and how. And it's funny. I know that sounds basic, but when I look back at how I came up with the story that became my first novel, that's what I was instinctively doing. Very briefly, I was in Japan living there. Laura and I were living there for the first time in 1993. I was on my way to work and I was intoxicated by the city. I can go on about that. I love Tokyo. It's my favorite city. I miss it. I haven't been back in since before the pandemic. But anyway, Laura and I were indulging all our interests about Japan. We had some Japanese friends and they're taking us to jazz clubs. I was training at the Kodokan 6 days a week. I felt like I was living in a movie about my own life. Every night when I got to the Kodokan, I was like, I cannot believe I'm here. I was out of my mind. I felt like I was high all the time when I was living over there. It was incredible. Going to whiskey bars. We just loved everything about Japan. And I have this pre-existing interest in martial arts. I had my training at the CIA. I've read a lot of books on things that I call forbidden knowledge, like stuff the government doesn't really want anyone except specially trained individuals to know, but that's always been an interest. And all this stuff was building up in my head as I think of it as like dried tinder waiting for a spark, and Tokyo provided that spark. And one day on my way to work, a vivid image came to me of two men following another man down a street, not where I was at that moment, in another part of the city called Shibuya. Two men following another man down the street. It was this really vivid image, and I started asking questions about it. I was like, why am I thinking about this? And I was like, they're assassins. They're going to kill that guy. And then I was like, that's interesting. So you get an answer. And this is a little bit what I was talking about with Gavin DeBecker. Suspense is always the thing. Answer the question, but that it's got to lead to another question, which is its own form of suspense. And this is what storytelling and story creation consists of. I'm like, got it. But you don't stop there. It's not like, oh, they're assassins. It's Miller time. I'm like, all right, they're assassins, but well, what did that guy do? Why are they going to kill him? I don't know. Maybe this or that. Well, who hired them? Why does the person who hired them want to? How did these guys get into the business? Like, how do you become an assassin? Do you have to get licensed? Can you just hang out a shingle like you want to become, I don't know, whatever, like you want to open a hair salon, something like that? And every answer I came up with that was satisfying. It was satisfying, but it also led to more of those who, when, where, when, how questions. And if you keep asking those questions and keep applying them to every answer you get, then a story will start to unspool. And in reverse, if you want to see how it works in reverse too. Every novel you've ever read, I promise, works the same way. Every novel will open and unfold by giving you critical information on three topics: who, what, and where. The characters, the plot, and the setting. We have to give you this information. As a storyteller, I have to give you this information to start to ground you in the story, to seduce you out of your everyday world and into the world of the story. If I don't start to ground you in the story, you won't enter it. You won't feel like you're there. But every piece of information I give you has to paradoxically, insidiously create curiosity for more. So the more satisfied you feel like you're getting, the hungrier you get at the same time. That's the magic of storytelling. And you build a story the same way. I don't even remember the question you asked me. Sorry for the long answer.
It was that was great. Okay. I don't know. I'm trying to remember what the question was. It doesn't matter. It was a fantastic rant.
Hopefully I was a good answer to some question.
Hey, listen, we're going to wrap this up. Is there something that you've been on a bunch of talks before? Is there something that in the back of your mind you go, why hasn't anybody ever asked me this? I'd love to fucking talk about this. Is there one thing that you'd just love to share with my audience that we haven't talked about? And we'll have you back on.
Yeah, you have to give me a chance to think about that. I feel like I've been asked all sorts of things, including, do I have a severed head in my refrigerator? Which I don't. Sorry to disappoint. I don't know. But here's something that just popped into my head, which I'll mention, and it really is short. I'm a Joe Rogan fan, and I once heard Joe Rogan say something, and this is to me a good illustration of how I try to distinguish between what's aspirational and what's actionable. And what Rogan said in this show, this is years ago, he said, I think we need to be kinder to each other. I totally agree with that. But that's an aspiration. When you start to break that down, what does that consist of? And I'll tell you what it consists of, at least at a high level, but you can start working on this. We're always kind to people who are kind to us, or almost always. I mean, you can come up with scenarios where you're in a really bad mood or something. But if somebody treats you respectfully, kindly, whatever, you will respond in kind. That's how we're wired. It's the people who treat us disrespectfully or unkindly or in a way that we think we don't deserve to be treated that we tend not to be kind to. So if you want to make Joe Rogan's very good aspirational longing into something actionable, then you have to start thinking about how to treat better people who don't treat you that well. Not everybody wants to do that. Sonny Barger, I think, famously said, treat me well, I'll treat you better. Treat me badly, I'll treat you worse. That's one way of going through life. It's not for me, but I get it. It's instinctively appealing. But if you want to be kinder to people, what you're talking about is being kinder to people who aren't necessarily kind to you. That's hard. Anyway, that just popped into my head when I was talking about the different.
No, that's beautiful.
And what's actionable.
It just made me think of something that I was contemplating a little while ago and wrote a little bit on about, because most people follow me for self-defense. And I did a little rant on, when's the last time you attacked yourself? In other words, we do that all the time. I suck. I fucked up. I'm an asshole. I did that. And there's a story of Fred Couples was taking a golf lesson from some famous coach like Jim Flick or whatever. And he shanks the ball or screws something up and he hits it. He goes, "You fucking asshole." And his coach looks at him and says, "Hey, if your son did that to the ball and I said to him, 'You're a fucking asshole,' and you were watching," he goes, "What would you say to me?" He said, "I would not let you talk to my son that way and I'd fire you on the spot." I go, "Why would you talk?" He says, "Why would you talk to yourself that way?" And so to just add to that very powerful Joe Rogan message and to be kinder to other people, it's you got to be kinder. We got to be kinder to ourselves. I think we're all way too hard on ourselves in most of the time. And that creates.
I love that. I think it's good to hold yourself to a higher standard, but I don't know why you'd want to be mean or cruel or unduly harsh to yourself. Like, the purpose is to learn how to do better. You don't have to call yourself an idiot for that. Try to be honest about what you screwed up on. And
yeah, I'm such a moron for bringing that up. Fuck. It was a joke, everybody. Okay, Barry, best place to interact with you?
Twitter.
Online? Do you like
Twitter,
do you
Facebook.
do Twitter?
Yeah,
do you answer fans?
I think social media you can analyze it as a severely toxic drug. Look, it's like anything else. It has its benefits, but it often brings out the pettiest aspects of human nature. So I use it a little bit, but judiciously. But hit me on Twitter or Facebook, and you'll usually get a reply. It's just my name, but whether it's on Facebook or Barry Eisler, it's just Barry Eisler. Put my name together, no spaces or anything, and you can find me or whatever.
Barry's website.
Or read my books. They're like Mark Twain said, "A confession to everything by a man who's done nothing." That's where you can really get to know me.
There you go. Your books are great, man.
I'm helping make them better.
I'm flattered. I'm flattered to call you a friend and know you, and to have been participated a little bit in John Rain's education, and very, very cool.
I'm lucky to know you too, my friend. Thank you,
dude. Be safe. Hang on. We're gonna end this thing, and I'll talk to you a little bit more offline.
And for anyone who stayed with us for 2 hours, thank you, and I hope it was useful.
Yeah, a bunch of people did. Very cool. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you on the next show.